Updates suck, but sometimes they are indeed required. And today we want to talk about fixing updates that go awry. Now, some people will say Linux sucks, all these updates and instabilities. It's not a Linux problem, but Linux actually is the best place where you can handle it appropriately. Thanks for checking out this video from Switched to Linux. And today we want to talk about when updates go south. I want to talk about a couple recent higher profile Windows and Mac updates, just so you are aware this is not a Linux thing, but it is true that Linux itself will cause some system issues, and it also will depend on your hardware and the distribution that you are running. Of course, the motivation for this video is I did the horrible thing on a computer today, on an Arch system. I updated it. Yes, I updated an Arch system for the first time in I don't know, maybe 2 months. And then I proceeded to spend the rest of my morning fixing the things that the updates messed up. And one of them was a known issue that I just didn't know about. And the other one was, well, I've been using a Arch user repository package for way too long, and so I switched that over to the Flatpak version, which didn't exist when I installed that. Now it does, and we'll talk about that. But I have had to revert a few packages in the past, and I had to revert a package this morning because of an instability issue on Arch. But hey, on Linux, I can do that. Not as easy to do it in other places. So before we get into our issues with Windows and Mac updates as of the recent months, if you've not already subscribed to the channel, please do so if you would like to do so. If you do like notifications, go ahead and turn on that notification button. But I don't do notifications myself, so I'm not offended if you don't do that. Of course, you can also hit the like button there and leave us a comment as well. Let us know which borked updates have you had to deal with and what systems have you had the most problems with. Of course, if you've been running Linux for so long, you haven't had other systems. None of the Mac or Windows things I'm going to talk about here have impacted me because I haven't run those systems for a long, long time. But let's go ahead and get into them. In March of this year, KB 5035853 of the Windows update is an automatic update that showed itself as a non-critical, just like a small, simple thing, so it pushed itself on everybody's computer without anybody really knowing. It caused a massive increase in the dreaded blue screen of death, some stuttering among video and audio, and general instability of the system. In February, KB 5034765 also did a very similar thing. This had issues with installing the system. There was actually another holdback, another update. I don't have the KB number from January, did a very similar thing. And it caused some stability issues. It caused Explorer to crash frequently and other issues. Now, these are more minor updates in Windows that if you have these, you can generally go into the Windows settings, go into your update history, and you can find these particular updates and remove them. So Windows does have an easy method for getting back to a system that is stable if a simple small update has messed itself up. Now, there might be bigger updates that mess themselves up, but generally speaking, we don't see huge updates like that. Even in Linux, that's very rare. The one case I have experienced some of that mostly had to deal with my hardware, not with Linux itself. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, on the Mac end, in March of this year, Sonoma 14.4 decided to come out, and that decided to delete your files from your cloud drive. So if you're relying on your iCloud drive to keep backup copies of files, your reliance has been shattered. It depended on one particular setting you had on your computer, rolling into the update from a lower version of 14 up to 14.4, and then we had that issue. The other things accompanying that particular Mac update was issues with printers, devices, USB hubs, and a bunch of other things just stopped working. The unfortunate thing with Apple is they're so aggressive at not allowing a lot of rollbacks. I think you can roll back some minor things in some rare circumstances. But for the most part, you're really stuck with Apple pushing out the fix. Now, because Apple has a very limited amount of hardware that is all entirely in-house, they generally can push out the fixes pretty quick. And I haven't heard if anybody lost permanent files from this iCloud issue or if it was just their local account reaching out to Apple and Apple was able to get them back. I don't know. It's just nothing I've researched. But just be aware, Windows and Mac will also have some issues. So what issues might you encounter here in Linux? Now, I did a couple videos I will refer to, and I'm just going to summarize those videos and go and watch those particular videos. I will put them at least on cards here on YouTube. I might put them in the description as well. So one of these is kernel issues. If you have a kernel issue in Linux, this is a little bit more of a major bug. Now, with a kernel issue, you will come into a couple things. I have encountered this on my Linux Mint laptop that only has a 256 gigabyte SSD. And that system, what happened is Linux Mint, at least in that system, because of how it's encrypted and things, it has a separate boot partition that is only 500 megabytes. And kernels are getting larger and larger. And with that particular laptop, I had to manually upgrade to a higher level of the kernel because it has more edge hardware, which means it has an old LTS kernel in there, and then the one we're running, and then all of the cumulative security updates. We had an issue with that computer that for some reason, for a while, it was not deleting the old kernels if I hit the manual deletion. It is now doing that. I pushed the updates on that computer just a couple of days ago, and indeed, I actually had the boot sector open to watch what happened when I was doing a manual intervention on that, and indeed I saw those old kernels disappear, and I knew I was safe to do my update. So I have a whole video about what happened, and when the system updated, the kernel failed to update properly because the boot sector ran out of space. And in reality, as I said in that video, if I looked at that screen and said, oh, we need to do an intervention, I wouldn't have had any problems. However, I was a fool and I restarted the computer into a failed kernel, but I had the computer set up that it was very hard, if not impossible, to get to the grub menu. You see, Linux does another cool thing, that it will always keep one or two extra Linux kernels. So if you get to that grub menu and you go down to the advanced options, you will see the previous kernels you can boot into. So in this case, the kernel it was trying to update to failed. But if I could get to that grub menu and go down and boot into an older version, I could still get into the system and do my manual fix. But I had things set up to basically time out the boot menu, and I wasn't able to set it in such a way where I could get in there and do that easily. So I talked about how I fixed that system in one of those videos. Of course, we did talk about manually cleaning up that boot sector if it happens to get full. And again, this really is only impacting a Linux Mint system that has a small hard drive. I have the same exact setup on a much larger computer, terabyte hard drive, never had a single issue with that at all. And so it's just because it sizes that boot sector based on relative size of the hard drive entirely. But nevertheless, we can go back. So if you upgrade a Linux kernel and something in that Linux kernel has some hardware issue and causes instability, you can always boot your system into the previous one. Not as easy to do on Linux and on Mac. Now, some of the systems are starting to have these dual modes. So like NixOS is one measure where it does this, where it runs it has a sector in waiting and a sector in active. Your Pixel phones and probably some other Android phones do the same thing as well. And so what this does is it allows you to always have a good working system. So they're kind of borrowing from what Linux does. Yeah, we got something on reserve for if the main one doesn't work. And Linux tends to solve itself in those issues. Now let's talk about software. This is where we had some issues today. So software, I've had a few issues in the past on my Manjaro Raspberry Pi the versions of Bluefish Editor were broken, and I always had to roll the packages back. Now, the current one does work again, but it was in a state where it looked like it would work, but if you tried to open a file, like a PHP file or something like that, it would be like, ah, and crash. And I was able to just see it was something wrong with that particular version. I simply roll it back. And we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. Now today, as I push my updates, we have a brand new version of the dreaded keyword, my good friend Cody. And that came up to the Omega version, which is 21. And apparently there is an issue with 21 that Arch has not patched. Although we know the patch, apparently it's working other places, but Arch hasn't patched it yet. And since I'm running this on Endeavor OS, it's basically running the raw Arch repositories, and so it is broken. And that is an application I do use on the daily to watch movies or some videos or things like that. And so I end up having to do the rollback. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Endeavor PC to show you what you do. So what you want to do here is you can roll back to anything that is still in the cache. So if you go into var cache pacman package and do a list, you can see that this is all of the applications that are available. So if we wanted to list just, for example, all the Kodi packages, I can do an ls Kodi star, and then you'll see that we have a variety of different packages here. So I have 20.2, I have 20.2, well, 20.2-2, 20.2-4, 20.3-6, and 21.0-1. And then you'll see that we have a ZST, which is the actual package, and we have the SIG, which is the signature of the file to verify it. So if I were to clear my Pacman cache, these would all disappear except the latest one. This is why I don't clear my cache regularly. I want to always keep a few versions back there. In this case, the Kodi 21.0-1 is broken in this version of Endeavor, at least on my particular system. So what I did is you roll back to the previous one. So I went back to 20.3-6, which I know works. So what you're going to do for this is you just go in and you do a pacman -u, capital U, and then call the name of that file. So it's sudo pacman space dash capital U space /var /cache /pacman /package, and then the version, the exact version we want, which is Kodi -20.3-6-x86_64.pkg.tar.zst. And so with that, that allows me to downgrade to the current version. Now, sometimes you might have an issue with downgrading. That is, if there's some issue going on with your with a dependency or something. Now, in this particular case here, I'm not worried about it because it's such a new, a recently installed application. Rolling back, generally, I shouldn't have any issue, but you might. It's kind of a hit and miss at that point in time. If I had to deal with that, well, I just have to look for other ways of patching things. Now, one of the issues is that on the Omega version of this application, the individual theme, Rapier, that I wanted to use, although I found some indication it should be in the repository, it's not. And the theme developer has not yet set the theme style to match what Omega is looking for. So I just had to go in and manually change the Kodi theme XML file and change the 5.15.0 to 5.17.0. That made my theme compatible, and then Kodi stopped working, and then I was wondering, what's the problem here? Is it the theme? So I got rid of that, reverted everything back, went back to the original theme, and it's still a problem. Reached out on the Matrix server, and indeed, somebody on the Matrix server told me that yes, Arch does have currently a broken version of Kodi, at least as of right now. Hopefully that is going to be fixed. Now let's go ahead and talk about Linux Mint. So let's go ahead and jump on over to a Linux Mint computer. And as we jump on over here, what we're going to look at here is, now I have a couple updates. I just updated the computer a couple days ago, but we have a couple more now. So let's go ahead though and have a look at our view and our history of updates. Let's just particularly look at the timeshift application at the very top. So you can see the old version I had was 21.09.1, and the new version is 22.06.5. So if I wanted to roll back to this version, sadly we don't have a way inside the GUI here to roll that back, but we do have options to do that inside of our terminal. So inside of a terminal, what you can do is you can call the exact package name. Now, of course, we need to get the package name here. So we can check the package over on the terminal by doing apt-cache show package in the name of the package. So you can see that we have a couple versions. We have the 22.06, we have the 20.3, and you'll see that we have over here, this one's telling us we have 21.09. So I'm not sure why the version inside of here is not matching the version inside of our apt cache. So my guess is the apt cache is going to be the one that we're going to want to use. So if you wanted to install this version, which is going to be a downgrade, we can copy that, and then we can do a sudo apt install and then timeshift. But now if we specify the version, it should ask us if we want to downgrade the package. So now you can see it's asking me, do I want to downgrade the package? You can see there in bold, downgrade. And if I want to do this, it's going to give me the older version of the application. I'm going to go ahead and do that just to see how this works. Timeshift isn't the package I generally use anyway, so it doesn't matter to me if it's a little bit old for a second here, and I'll just update it here when I'm done with the system. So you can see that that's how we can get a package downgraded on a Debian system, Ubuntu system, Linux Mint system using apt. So as we summarize and bring back the video, updates can happen, they can be required, and also updates can mess up our systems. But that being said, it is important to keep your systems up to security standards. I do wish that we could say, hey, I want only security and no new features. But hey, that's a conversation for a different day. Also of good relevant point here is that Linux is not the only one that has issues with some updates from time to time, as does Windows, as does Mac. The advantage with Linux that we have, though, is that Linux does allow us to do a lot more manual interventions. We can roll back individual packages. We can generally control our kernels a little bit better. And we have a little bit more documentation and control over what we do over using Windows and Mac systems. So there's another thing we can do on Linux. If something does go crazy and haywire, hey, we got solutions. And now after running these solutions, I now have a good, fully functioning system on Endeavor to continue monitoring things. I'm going to be watching that Kodi package. I'm going to be seeing if more people are talking about that and pushing that into the latest update when I can. But we're probably going to be a little bit more cautious as we do it next time. Make sure we have a copy of that Pac-Man cache over there as well. That being said, Linux does give us a lot more control that we don't necessarily have in other systems. So thank you guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. Let us know what update snafus you've had in the comments down below.